The dark did not feel empty. It felt full, full of breathing she could not place, full of men she could not see, full of the one sound that mattered more than all of them, the wet, shallow rasp of the man bleeding on the floor under her hands. Tammy could not see Hyung-ji's face. She could only feel it. She had her hands pressed to his chest the way Nia had once pressed hands to her, 3 days into the dark, except no warm meal was coming to fix this. His blood was warm. That was the cruelest mercy of it. Warm meant his heart was still arguing with the floor. The phone in her other hand was still lit, still counting. The call he had made in the last second before the world went black, still running somewhere out in the night. He had pressed it into her palm and said one word she did not understand. Wait. Just wait. Marcus had stopped smiling. Tammy felt it before she saw it. The way the air in a room changes when the man who owns it stops being sure. Light was pouring in from the street now, white and total, more headlights than any one man arrives with. He turned toward it. All night Marcus's men had stood along the walls like furniture, certain, unhurried, men who knew how the evening ended because they had been told. Now something moved through them. Tammy could hear it more than see it, a shifting, a hesitation, boots that had been so sure going quiet. The silhouette in the doorway did not rush. Whoever it was had never rushed for anything in their life. She would understand that later. For now there was only the shape of someone small standing against all that blinding light, and the impossible sight of armed men beginning to lower their hands. Tammy did not understand what she was seeing. Men who an instant ago had been waiting to finish a job were stepping back, heads dipping, the way she had only ever seen people move around Hyung-ji himself. Under her hands his chest rose, fell, dragged for the next breath. She bent close to his ear and begged him to stay, told him help was here, told him anything that might keep him arguing with the floor. And then his lips moved. She felt the shape of it against her cheek more than heard it. One word, cracked and almost gone. Not her name. A word she had never heard him say in all their months, soft and broken and final, the word a grown man only says from the floor when he has run out of everything else. Mother. The silhouette stepped into the candlelight, and it was a woman. Small. Older. Silver hair pinned back without a strand loose, a dark coat that had cost more than the room. She did not look at the blood. She did not look at Marcus. She walked in like she was entering a garden, and every armed man in that place lowered his eyes as she passed. Marcus laughed, but it came out wrong. Too high, a man reaching for the old confidence and finding the shelf empty. He asked who she thought she was, walking into his meeting. He told her she had picked the wrong night and the wrong room. His men did not move to back him. That was the first thing that truly frightened him, that he gave an order with his eyes and not one boot answered it. She let him finish. She had the patience of someone who had outlived louder men than him. When the silence had gone on long enough to make him sweat, she said one sentence, quietly, almost kindly. She told him he had put his hands on her son. The room understood it before Marcus did. The men along the wall had already known. He was the last to learn whose floor he was actually standing on. Her son. Tammy's mind snagged on the word and could not move past it. She looked down at the man bleeding in her arms, the man whose name emptied rooms, the man she had watched empty them, and then up at this small woman in front of whom that same name seemed to mean nothing at all. Because there was a name above his. There had been the whole time. His hand found hers on the floor and gripped, weak but deliberate, and she understood he was trying to tell her something the word from before had already started. Stay calm. It is all right. She is mine. Tammy held on and did the hardest thing she had done all night. She trusted him, in the dark, with her whole terrified heart. Somewhere a lamp came on. The total dark broke into ordinary dimness, and with the light came order. Soonja's people moving through the room without a word spoken, the way a body's own cells move to a wound. Marcus's men were not fighting them. They were standing aside for them. The trap he had built had quietly become a room full of people who answered to someone else. The woman crossed to them and knelt, and the cost of her composure showed only then. In the single second her hand hovered over her son's bloodied brow before it landed.
She did not weep.
Women like her had learned long ago that weeping was a thing you did later alone. She looked at Tammy across her son's body, and her sharp eyes went over Tammy's face slowly, with a recognition Tammy could not place. They did not take him to a hospital. Tammy learned that night that people like Sunja did not use the doors the rest of the world used. There was a suite waiting, white sheets, a quiet machine to count his heartbeat back to steady, a doctor who asked no questions and wrote nothing down. Tammy refused to leave his side, and to her surprise, no one tried to make her. She sat in the chair by his bed through the worst hours, the ones before dawn when a body decides which way it will go. She held the hand that had gripped hers on the restaurant floor. She counted his heartbeat on the monitor without meaning to, the old habit, except this number was climbing, 68, 70, 72, a pulse arguing its way back toward life instead of sinking like hers once had. She did not hear Sunja come in. The woman had a way of arriving in a room the way evening arrives, all at once and without a sound. She stood in the doorway a long while, watching Tammy hold her son's hand, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low and even.
"You did not run," she said.
Most would have run. Tammy said she had thought about it. Sunja almost smiled. "So, did my son, the first time he met you," she said. When the dawn came and the monitor had held its steady line for hours, Sunja took Tammy to a room Tammy had not known existed, a study high above the city, all dark wood and old gold, the kind of room where the real decisions of the world get made by people whose names never reach a newspaper. She poured tea for them both. And then, quietly, she began to take Tammy's understanding of the last several months apart. "My son is not what the city thinks he is," Sunja said. "The city thinks he is the top of the mountain. He is not the mountain. He is the wall I built in front of it." She told it plainly, the way you tell a thing you have carried too long. The empire everyone feared in Hyungji's name had never been his. It was hers. He had agreed, young, to wear the dangerous name in the light so that she could move in the dark. And all at once the careful blank spaces in Hyungji filled in. The cafe seat he always took with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. The phone he turned face down without looking. The work he would never name. The version of the truth he gave her at the glass wall that had been just true enough. He had not been hiding a monster from her. He had been hiding that he was a shield, and that shields are not allowed to want things for themselves. If your heart is in your throat right now, you are exactly where you should be, and it does not matter whether you have followed Tammy from the very first second or you just walked into her story tonight, because what happens in this room belongs to all of us now. This channel lives to tell stories like hers, the ones that drag you to the floor and then teach you how to stand back up, and the only way I get to keep making them is if you tell me they land. So tap subscribe and stay in the dark with her a little longer, because what comes through that door is about to change everything, and you do not want to find out secondhand. Tammy asked the question that mattered most to her, the one about the distance he always kept, the touch he never closed. Sunja understood it before Tammy finished. "A man who wears a false name cannot give a woman his true self," she said, "because the true self is the one thing he is forbidden to own. He kept his distance from you because he had nothing honest to offer you yet. That is not coldness. That is the loneliest kind of love there is." Then Sunja told her about the debt, the one Hyungji had cashed with his last clear second on that floor. It was not owed to a stranger. The call had been to her, and the debt that bought their lives was not theirs at all. It was the Reed family's, an old one, signed in a year before Marcus was born, when the Reeds had been a single bad season away from losing everything, and one quiet woman had chosen to save them. The Reeds did not outrank her son. They knelt to her. The old money Marcus threw around like a birthright had been kept alive by the very woman his grandson had just tried to make a widow of. He had moved against the one house in the city he was forbidden to touch, and he had done it blind, because no one had ever told the spoiled grandson whose grace his whole life was built on. Tammy sat with all of it as the window went from black to gray to the first thin gold of morning. The man she loved was a shield. The woman pouring her tea ran half the city's shadows. The ex who had once made her feel too small to be loved had blundered, swaggering, into the path of a power he could not begin to measure. And somewhere underneath all of it, a question was forming that Sunja had not yet answered. Why had she come herself? By the time the sun was fully up, the danger to his life had passed. The steady green line held. Tammy went back to the suite and took up her chair again, and she was there, holding his hand, when his eyes finally opened and found her face first in the whole room, the way they always had. He tried to apologize for the lie before he had even fully woken. She put 2 fingers to his mouth and told him she already knew all of it. His mother had taken the whole house of cards apart and shown her the inside. For a moment, he looked almost afraid of what she would do with the truth. Then she told him the only thing that mattered. She was still here. She had not run when it was dark and bloody, and she would not run now that it was only complicated. And there, finally, with no name to protect and no distance left worth keeping, he closed the space he had held open between them for months. His hand came up to her face the way it had on the terrace, except this time it did not stop. This time it landed, warm and certain against her cheek, and the almost touch she had carried home furious all those weeks ago became simply a touch, the first honest one of his life. They stayed like that a long time, neither in a hurry, 2 people who had each spent a lifetime braced for the next blow, learning what it felt like to simply be allowed to rest. But peace, for people in their world, is a thing that has to be paid for. And out beyond that quiet room, the account for the night in the restaurant had not yet been settled. Sunja did not let things sit. The same evening her son's pulse held steady, a car moved through the wet city carrying a summons that could not be refused, to a house that had not been formally called to account in 30 years. The Reeds were being asked to answer for their blood, and the one being made to send for them, by the terms of a debt older than his grandson, was the head of the family himself. Augustus Reed was a man who had spent 50 years making sure his name was spoken carefully. He had built the Reeds back into something feared, courts and councils and quiet rooms, the very power Marcus had borrowed to crush a stranger. But Augustus knew what Marcus had never been told. He knew exactly whose grace the whole family stood on. And when the summons reached him, the old man went very still, because he understood at once what his grandson had done. The old man did not send a representative. A debt of that weight is answered in person, or not at all. He came himself, cane and silver beard and all, into the same high study where Sunja had unmade Tammy's understanding at dawn, and the 2 of them, the head of the Reeds and the woman the Reeds owed everything to, sat across a table that had decided the fates of more people than either would ever name. There was no shouting in that room. Power at that altitude does not shout. Sunja laid it out the way she laid everything out, quietly, completely, leaving no corner for him to hide in. His grandson had spent the family's protection like pocket money to win back a woman who had outgrown him, and in doing so had laid hands on the one family the Reeds existed by the mercy of. The debt, she said, was now called. Augustus did not argue. A man does not argue a debt his own house signed before his grandson drew breath. He asked one question, the only one left to him, what she required. And Sunja told him. Everything Marcus had broken would be restored, every permit, every door, every partner driven from her son's name, all of it set right by the Reeds, because the damage had been done by a Reed. That was the easy half. The hard half was the boy. Augustus asked, in the low voice of a grandfather who already knew the answer, what was to be done about Marcus. And here Sunja did something that surprised even the old man. She said the matter of Marcus did not belong to her. It belonged to the woman his grandson had spent 2 years trying to make small. She would leave that judgment where it had been earned. So they brought Tammy into the room. She had dressed herself with care that evening, Deep green and clean lines, her hair in the full halo she used to hide, and now wore like the crown Nia had once promised her it was. She walked into a study full of the oldest power in the city, and she did not shrink an inch. The girl who once looked away from herself in a dark bathroom mirror was nowhere in the room. Augustus studied her for a long moment. This woman his grandson had thrown away and then tried to destroy. He told her, with the blunt honesty of an old man past the age of softening things, that his family had wronged her twice, once when his grandson discarded her, and once when his grandson tried to break the man she loved. He told her the Reeds would make the second right, however she named it. And then he asked her what she wanted done with Marcus. While the elders waited on her answer, Marcus was somewhere across the city, learning what it felt like to be on the other side of power. The calls he made went gray and unanswered, the way Tammy's once had. The men who had stood along the restaurant wall for him would not meet him now. The protection he had borrowed without understanding it had been switched off at the source, quietly, completely, in a single night. He called his grandfather last, when the rest of his world had already gone silent, and for the first time in his charmed life Augustus did not pick up for him. Marcus stood in a cold garage listening to his own family's line ring out, and somewhere under the panic the truth began to dawn on him that he had broken something he had never even known was load-bearing. Tammy walked to the window before she answered, and looked out at the city that had once felt too big to belong to her. She thought about the woman on the kitchen floor with the funeral pulse. She thought about every morning she had laced her shoes when quitting would have been easier. She understood that whatever she said next would not be about Marcus at all. It would be about who she had become. If you are still here, still holding your breath with her, do one small thing so I know you stayed. Drop a comment and tell me you are still watching in your own words, or leave the single emoji that matches what this moment is doing to your chest. Tell me where in the world you are watching from and the time on your clock right now, because I always want to know who is living through this with her. And if you are watching on your TV, reach over and tap that like, so I know you are in the room. She turned back to the room. She told them she did not want to watch. She did not want a front row seat to a man being broken, did not want to stand over Marcus the way he had stood over Hyung-ji, because that was his language, and she was done speaking it. Let the family settle its own account, however it settled such things. She would not be in the room for it. She would not give him even that. Something passed between the two old powers at that. A look, brief and almost amused. The look of people who have spent their lives among the cruel and have just watched someone choose differently and lose nothing by it. Augustus inclined his head to her. The small bow a man like him gives perhaps twice in a lifetime. Soonja's mouth curved. The matter of Marcus, they understood, was settled, and the deepest cut of all had been Tammy's to deliver, by refusing to pick up the knife. The account came due for Marcus in a cold garage, the way these things come due for men who never see them coming. He did not see Tammy again. That was the point. The woman he had defined himself by tearing down had decided he was not worth the witness, and so whatever the Reeds did to fold their reckless heir back down to size, they did it in the dark, far from her, far from the new life already opening without him in it. What happened to Marcus Reed after that night was not violence, which would have been a mercy he had not earned. It was erasure. The name that had opened every door for him closed them all at once. The family quietly cut their losses and cut him loose with them, and the man who had built his whole self on being a Reed discovered exactly how little was left of him underneath when the name was taken back. He became, very fast, no one at all. With Marcus gone and the debt paid, the doors that had slammed shut on Hyung-ji's name swung open again, one after another, faster than they had ever closed. The permits returned. The partners called. By the terms Soonja had said in that high study, the Reeds spent a great deal of their careful old power putting back exactly what their heir had torn down, and they did it without a word of complaint, because the alternative was a debt they could never have survived calling. But something in Hyung-ji had changed, and it did not change back. He stood at the same glass wall where he had once given Tammy a careful half-truth, and he found he no longer wanted the mountain his mother had built, nor the wall in front of it. He had worn a dangerous name his whole adult life to buy his mother room to move. He was tired of being feared. He wanted, for whatever years he had left, to simply be known. He told his mother he wanted out, and he braced for the fight of his life. It did not come. Soonja looked at her son for a long moment, at the brow that had healed and the eyes that finally held something other than vigilance, and she told him she had built the wall to protect him, and somewhere along the years had forgotten it was also a cage. She had her own people, her own hands. She did not need her son to be a shield anymore. She needed him to be alive and happy, which she had nearly lost forever on a restaurant floor. And so the man whose name had emptied rooms set it down. The way you set down a weight you have carried so long you forgot it was not part of your own body. The transition took months, quiet and careful, his mother's world rearranging to release him. But the morning it was finally done, he woke without a single thing to guard, and the first thing he did with his free and ordinary life was go and find the woman who had knelt in the dark and refused to let go of his hand. Life did not become a fairy tale overnight, because Tammy would not have trusted one that did. She kept her apartment. She kept her notebook, the private ledger of checkmarks that had answered the cruel one Marcus once kept on her body. She kept her 6 in the morning, her gym, her Nia. She had not climbed out of that dark to dissolve herself into someone else's world the moment a man offered her one. She made him meet her in hers first. Nia, of course, had opinions. She sat at Tammy's little kitchen table the morning after she heard the whole impossible story, coffee going cold in her hand, and demanded every detail twice. She had described his jawline for a full minute. Nia reminded her, back when he was just an insufferable stranger on a staircase. Tammy threw a dish towel at her. They laughed the way they had laughed on the gym floor, like the world belonged to them, because for once it actually did. There was one more thing Tammy did before she let herself be fully happy, one door she had closed at the bottom of the dark that she had never reopened. Nia watched her go quiet over her coffee, watched her pick up her phone and turn it over in her hand, and knew without asking what her friend was finally ready to do. She had stopped answering her mother at the bottom of the dark, in the days when the cruel sentences played on a loop, and she could not bear to let anyone who loved her hear what she had become. Months had passed. The shame had healed over without her noticing, the way a body heals around a wound until one day you press the place and find it no longer hurts. Her thumb hovered over the green button. She pressed it. Her mother answered on the second ring, the way mothers do when they have been waiting months for a call they were too wise to demand. There was no scolding. There was only a voice Tammy had been starving for without letting herself know it, saying her name like it was good news. Tammy cried then, the clean kind of crying, the kind that empties the last of the old dark out of a person and leaves room for something better. Hyung Ji came to her the way he had always come, with small things and no announcement. The same particular tea he had once slid across a cafe table without comment, except now there was no careful blank space behind it, no name to hide, no work he could not speak of. He came to her as a man with empty hands and a true face, which was the most extravagant gift he had ever given anyone, because it had cost him everything he was built to be. He stood her at the same glass wall where he had once kept the careful distance, and this time there was no distance left to keep. He told her, in the plain, unpolished words of a man used to honesty, that he had been feared by thousands and known by no one, and that she was the first person who had ever looked at him and seen a man instead of a name. He asked her to stay, not in his world, because he no longer had one, but in the ordinary life he wanted to build beside hers. She said yes the way she had learned to do everything now on her own terms and in her own time, after she had let him sit in the wanting a moment the way she had once made him ask twice for her to sit at his table. And when she finally kissed him, on his terrace at golden hour with the whole gold city spread beneath them, it was not the desperate clutch of two people escaping the dark. It was slow and certain and unhurried, the kiss of two people who had decided to stay. They stood wrapped together a long while as the sun went down, and Tammy thought about the woman she had been on the kitchen floor, the one who had counted her own heartbeat like a funeral. She wished she could reach back through all those dark months and tell her one thing, that the body she had been taught to be ashamed of would one day shield a man from death and be held like something holy on a golden rooftop, exactly as it was, never once made smaller. There was one last conversation held quietly that Tammy was not in the room for. Augustus Reed came one final time to settle the very bottom of the debt, the formal close of a 30-year account, and the two old powers sat where they had sat before. When the accounts were balanced, Augustus paused and slid one last thing across the desk, a sealed envelope, cream paper, dark wax. He told her it had nothing to do with the Reeds. It was a matter from another house, one that still kept its own ledger the old way, and it had been entrusted to him to pass along to her, for when it mattered. He did not say more. Soon-ja did not open it. She simply slipped it into her coat without a glance, the way she did everything, and the matter closed. The seasons turned, the way they do for people who have finally been allowed to let them. The penthouse that had once been all severe dark precision softened, year by year, around the warmth of a woman who refused to live anywhere that made her feel less. And on a golden afternoon a full year on, in a quiet garden high above the city, the two families that had once nearly destroyed each other gathered for something none of them had expected to live to see. Tammy stood in that garden in a gown the color of the dress she had once bought herself for no occasion but her own worth, and she rested her hand over the gentle new curve at her middle, a body that had grieved and fought and shielded and was now, quietly, making room for a life. She had not become smaller to be loved. She had become more and more and more, and every version of her had been worthy the whole way down. Hyung-ji stood behind her with his arms around them both, the man who had once kept the whole world at a careful arm's length now, unable to be more than a breath away from the two people he loved. He had set down a name that emptied rooms to gain a life that filled one. He had spent his youth being feared. He would spend the rest of it being held. He had decided, on a restaurant floor with the last clear second he thought he had, that this was the only thing worth the gamble. He had been right. Soon-ja watched from a garden chair, a woman who had spent a lifetime making herself unbreakable so that no one could ever make her small again, and who had seen that same fight and that same victory in the face of a stranger's photograph one ordinary evening. She had come through a blazing doorway expecting to save her son's life. She had not expected to gain a daughter who understood, without being told, exactly what it had cost her to become the woman she was. Nia was there, of course. She had been there at the very bottom. The fist on the door that would not stop, the voice that refused to let her best friend disappear into the dark, and so she had earned the very top more than anyone. She stood in that golden garden with her hands pressed to her mouth and cried the happy, unguarded tears of a woman watching the person she had refused to give up on receive everything she had always deserved. They sat together as the sun went down, the unlikeliest family ever assembled, an African woman who had clawed her way out of a dark apartment, a Korean man who had set down an empire to be ordinary, a mother who ran cities from the shadows, a best friend who had started the whole rescue with a grocery bag and a refusal to leave. Tammy's own mother arrived as the candles were lit and the circle closed, whole. If you had told the woman on that kitchen floor, the one with the funeral pulse and the towel over the mirror, that a single cruel text would be the first domino in a chain that led to this exact golden evening, she would not have believed you. But that is the thing about being made to feel small. Sometimes it is the precise moment a person decides, never again, and goes looking for the size they were always meant to be. The wine she had poured that first terrible night had been for an announcement she never got to make, that she had never in her life been happier. She understood now that she had been wrong, but not in the way Marcus had made her feel wrong. She had not yet known what happy was. She had to lose the whole floor beneath her to find the ground she was actually meant to stand on, the one no man could pour or pull away. She stood at the edge of the garden as the last gold drained out of the sky, one hand over the new life she carried, and for the first time in her entire existence, she did not check the dark glass to see how she looked. She already knew. She looked like a woman who took up exactly as much space as she pleased, and dared the whole world to call it anything but beautiful. The seasons turned once more, and on a soft, quiet night, in a warm room far gentler than the one where this chapter of her life had nearly ended, the family she had built gathered close around its newest and smallest member, arrived safe and whole into a world that would only ever know him held. She held her son in the soft lamplight with Hyung-ji's arm around them both, and she thought, just once, of the cruel text that had started it all, the man who had been ashamed of the body that had now carried and delivered a whole new life. She felt no anger toward Marcus anymore. She felt something better. She felt nothing at all, the clean nothing of a wound healed so completely it no longer remembers the blade. Soonja stood at the foot of the bed, the woman who ran cities from the shadows, undone at last by something no empire could buy. She reached into her coat out of an old habit, the way she touched the things she carried, and her fingers brushed the cream envelope still sealed there, the one from the house that kept its own ledger. For just a moment her face changed. Then her grandson stirred in his mother's arms, and she let the envelope be, and turned all the way toward the light. A woman who was told she was too much, who discovered that too much was exactly the right amount. A man who was feared by everyone and finally, simply loved by someone. Two scarred people who each decided the other was worth the fire, and walked through it, and came out the far side into the light.